How do you deal with a situation where you are literally being fired from a company? It's not a very pleasant experience, and it's only happened, unfortunately, once to me in my career. And, there's usually a lot going on to get to that situation, particularly if you're a high performing, executive, you're doing everything right. Suddenly you find yourself on the receiving end of some pretty difficult and unpleasant conversations, and sometimes being accused of doing things incorrectly or unjustly. And, you've always got to look at the full picture of what's really going on here. But my strong advice when this sort of situation happens, you always want to hold your ground. You never want to fold too quickly, and you really want to think about the long game, particularly in regards to your reputation, because there's no real upside to being fired. We really want to try and manage that as carefully as possible. Now, that might mean you've got to engage legal support and maybe the right employment lawyers to help negotiate the very best possible outcome and exit. Assuming you can sort that side of things out, sometimes you can get things onto pretty good terms, and it can be, cloaked under the guidance of, it's a mutual decision to part ways. That can be an okay scenario for most executives. And, the reality is not everyone will click with certain people. There can be personality conflicts in the workplace. There can be, issues. Even when you're doing everything correctly, you can be undermined by other colleagues. There's a whole lot of politics that can happen these days around executive moves. So it's a lot more common these days to come up against at least one difficult scenario in your corporate life where you're being sort of asked to exit a business. Maybe you've had a fallout with a boss or a colleague. Maybe you've even had an argument. There's always sort of two sides to the story, and I appreciate that, but there will always be these scenarios where at some point in a successful corporate career you're going to come across a scenario that is not particularly fair, not really a true reflection of what's going on, but there's a decision made to exit between the parties. Now, obviously, you want to try and get that onto the best possible footing that you can, and that's one aspect to handling a situation like that. The most important thing, though, going forward is taking a little bit of time out to do some self-reflection, to really be honest with yourself as to how this has come about. Take not everything, to heart, not let yourself get down and not lose your self-confidence, but you still do need to go through a process of review as to what has happened and what you could have done better or differently in the future if you want to evolve as a business executive. The second thing you want to do is you want to very carefully manage your message to market. And a big mistake that a lot of people make when this sort of situation has happened is they tell too many people their side of the story. They try and tell everyone what happened, try to justify, try to explain, try to defend, try to put your spin on things. That is a huge mistake in my opinion. The better strategy is to keep extremely quiet, keep the scenario very low profile, not make any unnecessary moves on LinkedIn to announce your exit if you do not have to, and to really be careful about your message to market. And the message could be very simple, and it could still be a very positive message, and you don't necessarily have to disclose the fact that you mutually agreed to exit, or that you were fired, or that you had a fallout, or you didn't get on with your boss, or whatever. You don't need to disclose these things, and you've got to be extremely careful that you take to market a very simple, very honest, very positive message. And that message is then shared with everybody that you encounter. So whether it be corporate headhunters, ex-colleagues, future colleagues. You want to keep the message really simple and really tight and on a needs-to-know basis only. So, if I had been terminated from an organisation, and let's say we've reached some sort of a mutual agreement, my message to market would still be focused on the positive elements of that situation. So the positive elements might be, I had a great journey at a particular company, I achieved X, Y, and Z. I am looking for my next career move. I've decided to leave the organisation, etc., etc. So you want to keep it really simple, really positive, not get down into the nitty-gritty, not get down into the negativity of a situation. You always want to take the high ground as well. Remember that if there is a formal exit from the company, there's usually a two-way confidentiality agreement. Sometimes there can be a deed of release, and usually within that deed of release there will be terms that include things like no disparagement of either party. So there'll be a mutual non-disclosure agreement, there'll be a mutual not going to disparage each other, and there may even be an actual specific agreement on how references are going to be handled going forward. So you use that agreement to really guide you going forward, and so it would be inappropriate for you to speak about confidential elements of that agreement. It would be inappropriate for you to talk about a fallout between the parties. So usually you try and reach an agreement where there's some level of confidentiality around the exit, and that is the ideal outcome for you because you can really protect your reputation going forward. Now, in my circumstance, many years ago, I was in a particular organisation and another individual was hired on a similar time frame, and this individual was a bit of a sort of razzle-dazzle executive, and he was very much convincing the management team that he was the hero of the day and he was going to solve all of their problems. And there was a huge leaning towards this individual very early on in the piece, and so I was kind of left out of conversations and meetings, and this other individual was really being given the favoritism and got on very well with the bosses, and they were all mates outside of work and so on. And so pretty quickly I was pretty put on the outer side of the business, and very soon after that I was actually asked to leave. And if I was honest with myself and I reflect on my part of the equation to get to that point, the reality was I did not perform at my best. I took umbrage that they favoured this other individual, and instead of trying to get on well with everyone and be a team player, I became a bit standoffish myself, and I didn't perform to my very, very best. And so when they actually did ask me to leave, I was reasonably happy to go. And, although it was a bit of a knock to my personal ego, I was happy to exit as well. Now, thankfully, it was during a probation period. So, there was no real, major issues. It wasn't really like being a terminated employee. It was just kind of a mutual parting of the ways. This is not working out for either party. As it turned out, I went and worked for a rival business to that organisation, and we would end up crossing paths a lot of times, and we all knew each other in the market. So it was very important reputation-wise that we all kept things as nice as possible. And, I've always made that, a key part of my career over the years. I always try and stay in touch with people, and even people who've been my enemies or who've caused me grief or heartache. I've tried to befriend them, or I've tried to keep at least the relationship on a positive level. Now, I know that's not always possible, and we're seeing a rise in these terminations, and we're seeing some constructive dismissals. We're seeing some really nasty situations where you can be caught out on the wrong side of the office politics. But my strong advice is always, stand your ground, where appropriate, get the right advice. always try and get a good mutual release on the situation so that you're protecting your reputation, so you're not being fired for incorrect reasons, you're not being fired for wrongdoings that you didn't do wrong. You really want to protect your reputation. Never ever just walk away and think, oh, well, that doesn't matter. It does. You have to hold your ground and make sure you get the right possible outcome. Speak to top employment lawyers so that you can negotiate these things. These things are always negotiable. And you want to try and obviously, not go down a legal pathway where possible, but you do want to use the right legal tools to ensure you get the right outcome. And then at some point, always do your own personal soul searching. What could you have done differently? What lessons did you learn from that experience? How would you do things differently in the future? Always take even the most bitter and nasty of circumstances and turn it into a positive, and turn it into a learning for yourself going forward. Even if it means the learning is as simple as, I would never treat one of my employees that way. Take something from the experience and go forward positively in the market. And I'm sure it'll be a thing of the past. You'll bounce back. Good executives always, come back from a situation like this. And sometimes we just have to acknowledge that every now and again we get ourselves into the wrong environments and they're not quite right for either party. Let's be mature about it, but let's make sure we're protecting our reputation at all times.